What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Dark Room, where two blind cinephiles illuminate the sided. I'm Lee Pugsley.
I'm Alex Howard.
And this is a podcast hosted by two legally blind guys for film lovers of all abilities. And today we have a very special guest, which I'm super excited about. We have filmmaker David Grabias here to talk about his film Brailled It, which premiered at the Slamdance Film Festival back in February. And I had the wonderful opportunity to be able to see it, and it's absolutely fantastic. So me and Alex are both really excited to talk about the film and just kind of what the process was like and where it's headed from here as well. So David, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
So let's just go ahead and dive right in. First of all, if you just want to give us a little overview of your journey into the film world and what inspired the idea for Brailled It.
Sure. So, I grew up and, never considered film as a career or as a possibility. That was something that fancy people, in Los Angeles and Hollywood did. And I just had the good fortune. I lived in San Francisco for a while, and I had a roommate who was going to San Francisco State and took a documentary film class, and they needed help carrying some equipment. And lo and behold, I helped them out, and I was just so blown away by the process and by the craft. And I was like, wow, this is something you can do. And here we are many, many years later, and I'm doing it. And it really is, I feel so lucky and privileged to be able to call myself a filmmaker and to do this kind of work. And Brailled It came about. I actually used to have an office on Melrose Avenue, right around the corner from the Braille Institute. And the Braille Institute is this enormous, brutalist cement structure that takes up more than a city block. It's like this huge thing. And I would walk by it on my way to lunch, and I would think, geez, what happens in there? And one day, consumed by curiosity, I walked in and I ended up chatting with the receptionist. And she said, we've got this thing coming up. It's called the Braille Challenge. It's super fun. You ought to check it out. And I ended up following up and just calling and getting permission to just go hang and observe. And I was just so struck by the kids, by their charisma, their intelligence, by how articulate they were. I mean, they're just, obviously amazingly smart, talented, brilliant kids. And then I was also so struck by this incredible vibe of community, right? Like, these are kids who, many of them, they're the only blind kid in their school. They're the only blind kid in their town. And for them to have the opportunity to be in a room with over 100 other kids, just, blind, low vision, just like them, who understand where they're coming from and who share a lot of their experiences, that experience of community was so powerful and palpable, and the joy that you could feel in the kids that they gleaned from that experience was just incredible. So, I ended up talking to the Braille Institute, and a year or two later, we settled on making a film, and they gave me permission and allowed us to do what we thought was the right thing in terms of the filmmaking process and all of that.
That's really awesome. I was a student at Braille Institute for a really long time. I'm still taking classes virtually through them, but I used to be on site there for about a year and a half in LA. So that's really awesome. Yeah. Would you mind, just for our listeners who don't know anything about your film Brailled It, can you give a summary of what the movie is about?
Sure. So obviously the film is about kids competing in the Braille Challenge. The Braille Challenge is an international competition. Kids from all over the English-speaking world, hundreds and hundreds, take regional tests, and the top 10 kids in 5 age groups fly to Los Angeles for a weekend and compete against each other to prove themselves as the best Braillers in their age group. And they take a series of tests over the course of I guess it's a day-long competition, a weekend where it takes place. So the film is a competition film at heart, right? It's following kids as they compete, who wins, who loses, the drama, oh my gosh, all that kind of stuff. But what makes the film a little bit different from most competition films is that we made the decision that the kids themselves who are competing, that they needed to make the film. They needed to be the filmmakers. And that was partially just because they're kids and they're going to have interactions. They're going to do things amongst themselves that they would never do in front of grown-ups. And we thought that, by empowering them and giving them agency, we would get some more intimate and interesting material. And then obviously the other fact being that all these kids are blind, low vision. It just felt weird for a bunch of sighted folks to be filming them rather than them doing the filming themselves. We did a couple tests actually at regional events where we had a sighted camera person, and it felt weird. It felt, quite frankly, a little creepy, because the kid knows, that you're there. They know you're in the room. They know you're filming. They know roughly where you are, right, in the room. They know you're standing next to them or in front of them or whatever. They can smell you, but they don't know what you're looking at. And that fact, the fact that they didn't know what we were looking at, was such an important thing. And I think by transferring that agency, transferring that quality to the kids and putting them in the situation where they were deciding what the camera looked at was essential. So anyways, the film is shot from the perspective of the kids, by the kids. It focuses on 3 kids in particular and their journeys. And yeah, it's a feature-length film.
No, I found your way of shooting really interesting. And I feel like basically the kids wear a GoPro around their neck. And so it's following them all day and through the whole competition, and whatever they see, we see. And I felt like it really gave us an insight that made it feel really personal. And it was a real connection with the kids because we were then cheering for whoever we were watching on screen. Mm-hmm. And I was telling Lee on the phone after I watched it, I was like, this kind of reminds me of Hard Knocks, the documentary series on HBO. I don't know if you've watched that, where like you get attached to someone and you're like, I want them to make the team, but there's no guarantee they're going to make the team. And you're like, what's going to happen? And It kind of reminded me of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I wondered, how did you choose what kids to give cameras? Was it only those 3, or did others have cameras and you just decided to go with these 3 storylines? Or how did you figure out how many kids had it?
No, that's a great question. So once we decided that the kids were going to do the filming, we reached back out to the Braille Institute, which runs the Braille Challenge, and told them our plan. And then we basically asked them for contact information for 3 or 4 kids in each age group. And they suggested kids who they thought would be open to the idea of filming and who they thought, who would be potentially charismatic or interesting characters. And so we did Zoom calls with, around 20, 25 kids from all over the world. And then out of those kids, we chose 9. Some of the kids we talked to, at the end of the day, they didn't want to film. They wanted to focus on the competition and whatever that stuff. They didn't want to be thinking about a camera and all that. Some kids, they just weren't comfortable with the camera, which I totally understand. But we found 9 who were really excited and enthused about the idea of filming and documenting their experiences. And so during the 2.5 days of the competition, every morning we met with them, we gave them a camera, batteries, all the stuff they needed, and then we just set them loose. And they filmed all day. If they had a technical problem or they had a question or their battery died or something, we were there to support. But they did all the filming, and then at the end of the day, we would get their footage, and then at the end of the event, we took all the footage back into the edit bay, and we worked with an editor who basically just took each kid's footage and laid it out, created like a string out assembly. And very quickly, it was clear, some kids, they forgot to turn the camera on, or they didn't want to turn the camera on. Some kids, what they filmed, there wasn't much content, to be honest, for lack of a better word. And then some kids, they filmed a ton, they filmed everything, and you really felt their personality in the footage. Even though the camera is, to your point, the cameras were mounted on their chest. They wore like a chest harness with a little action camera pointed forward. So even though you never saw them in the visual, you were with them. And these 3 kids in particular, who end up being the focus of the film, you really got a sense of their personality, their character. You just felt them. The moment that the edit cuts to their camera, to them, it's them. You just feel it. And so that was in some ways kind of like it just kind of came together on its own. And then once we had decided, we reached out to those 3 kids. We shared the assemblies with them to make sure, number one, that they were comfortable with all the footage, and number two, we wanted to be collaborative with the editorial process. So we asked them, like, are there certain scenes that you really love or certain scenes that you don't like? And then, with their input, we curated the edits down, and then our editor basically just interwove the three kids' cameras. So you go from a scene with Isaiah to a scene with Salome to a scene with Christopher and back and forth. But yeah, so that was the process. It was really kind of organic, and the best material kind of just rose to the surface and really demanded to be included.
You definitely captured so much personality within all three of the kids that you used for the main subjects of this documentary. And you felt their character, their quirks, their humor, their joy, their anxiety, like all of it was just encompassed so well. And it's really remarkable that even without seeing their faces most of the time, because, they have the cameras around their neck, that you still feel like you're on a journey with them. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to know, when you gave the kids the cameras at the beginning of the day, was there any direction you and your team gave them in terms of, these are some things that could be good to capture? Or were you more so just like, this is your decision, you turn on the camera when you want to, you capture whatever you want to, and you kind of let them have complete free reign?
It was definitely the latter. So we didn't give them any guidelines or requirements or anything. We just said, hey, all we want is for you to film as much as possible. Really, all we care about is, try to keep the cameras rolling as much as possible. That was our only request. With the 9 kids that we selected to have cameras, before the competition, we had a secondary meeting with them where we just talked about, okay, what does it mean to make a film? What kinds of films have you experienced? What kinds of documentaries have you experienced? Just so that they were somewhat conscious and intentional rather than turning the camera on and never thinking about anything. We also had conversations with them just, talking about what it meant to be the subject of a film, right? Even though the camera wasn't pointed at them, they were the subjects, the participants in the film, and we wanted them to be conscious of that and what it meant. And then also, finally, what does it mean to point the camera at someone? We talked to them a little bit just about the power dynamics there, and just making sure as they went through their day at the Braille Challenge and had their experiences, again, that they were never trying to hide the camera, that they were overt with what they were doing, and again, conscious, intentional, and empathetic as cinematographers and filmmakers. But yeah, and we told them then, and in the film, we've credited, they are all directors. I mean, they made the film. They shot it and they directed the scenes. They chose what to film when. So in that sense, they really are the directors of the film. And, we were excited to give them that credit and to celebrate them for that.
And it really is amazing because, you really had to kind of put your trust in the kids, really just be like, oh, I guess we'll just see what we get from this day. There wasn't any not that there wasn't, obviously you know what you want or you hope what you're going to get, but it must have been really hard to kind of let it go and let's just see what happens in a way.
100%. No, it was definitely, but I think so much of that, we knew that of those 9 kids that had cameras, that 4 or 5 were really interesting characters, and that their interactions and experiences were just going to be interesting. And so again, as long as they were intentional with filming and as long as they remembered to, to turn the camera on when things were happening, all that kind of stuff, we knew we would get some stuff. We just didn't know how much or how intelligible it would be, right? Like how succinct or how clear or how focused their storytelling would be.
I also noticed, I was wondering if this is intentional or not, but I feel like there was some education in how blind people go about their lives and function going on in the film, but it wasn't heavy-handed. Like you didn't even really know it was happening. I think one of the big examples of this was one of the boys, it might have been Christopher, that you show him going down the stairs. And yeah. I have trouble with stairs. And so I was like, wow, he's going down the stairs really well. And I'm almost wondering, did you pick certain things to be like, I want to educate the sighted audience that like, this person is very independent. Blind people can do things on their own, showing the way of life as well as the competition.
I mean, not intentionally, no. I think, interestingly, I mean, for sure, there were aspects of the experience of these kids that, we wanted to make sure that the audience felt and saw. Like, for example, the very first scene of the film is Salome, the girl, and she's alone in her hotel room, and she has to basically negotiate her way through the hotel room, get her stuff, go out the door, go down the hallway, go down the elevators, and get to the lobby where she's trying to meet her family. And we play that whole sequence essentially in real time. You see her in her room. You see her, she's kind of feeling around. She finds her stuff. She gets to the door. She opens the door. She's going down the hallway. And then for me, what was most powerful is she gets to the elevator. And I'm sure you guys noticed, but right where the elevator buttons are, there's a trash can. She keeps, every time she goes for the elevator buttons, she ends up, bashing into the trash can. And, and then she doesn't, because the elevator doors don't ding, she doesn't know when they're open. So she has to keep going back and forth from one door to the other to touch to make sure they're closed. And then when one does open, she walks in and she doesn't know if anyone's there. So she says hi, right, to the empty elevator and then goes down and checks in. Anyways, to me, we wanted to start the film with a scene where you very much intentionally had to process the world with one of these kids, very overtly having to navigate as a blind person in a somewhat accessible environment, right? Just to establish that and to make sure people were conscious and thinking and seeing that, hearing that. But otherwise in the film, I think so much of that stuff just comes through organically, right? Most of the material that is selected in the edit was selected because of the audio rather than the video, right? So when Isaiah's going down the stairs, I don't remember exactly, but that piece of video was included because of what he said rather than the fact that he was going down the stairs. That was less important. And then the other piece that I would just bring up is, these are kids who are, as we watch them at the competition, they are coming of age. Right? They're literally, not only are they navigating the world in terms of learning, literally how to navigate as a blind person, but they are understanding how to navigate the world as a person, right? Like one of my favorite scenes is Salome, again, the girl, they go out to dinner the night before the competition. And on the way home, she's trailing her father. So they're walking down the sidewalk outside and she's holding onto her father's elbow. And at a certain point, he shrugs her away. And he's like, you can do this. You don't need to trail. You don't need to touch me to trail me. And like any other 13, 14-year-old girl, she flips out. She's like, oh my God, I'm going to die. You're going to leave me here all alone. I don't know where I'm going. I'm going to never make it to the bridge. Like she just flips out like a teenage girl. And to me, I mean, it was both this incredible moment as a blind person, independence, learning how to navigate, using her cane, all that kind of stuff. But it was also this really poignant moment of a girl and her father and a teenager wanting to be independent, wanting to grow up, but still wanting to hold on to her dad. It's both those things at the same time, right? And I think for me, the most powerful moments in the film are those when you feel them not just as blind kids, but as kids coming of age and navigating this process of maturation and growing up and all those things.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And I think that's always the most powerful thing in film for me is when you find that universal human relatability, whether it's in a documentary or a narrative film, that you're able to see a piece of yourself in the subjects in a documentary or the characters in a fictional film. And you can say to yourself, I've been there, I'm there right now, or I've had that experience. There's just something so powerful about that, like human bond that connects us all that film just can amplify in such a grounded and profound way.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know then, due to the unique process that this film was, what were some of the challenges that your team encountered? Or maybe it was perfect and there were no challenges at all, whether that was in like pre-production, production, or post-production?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, again, the pre-production with, finding the kids, identifying who was going to do the filming, all that went relatively smoothly. And during the actual production, it was pretty simple. I mean, again, we just gave the kids the cameras, made sure they were running and sent them off, and that went very smoothly. I mean, I think the hardest part or the biggest challenge was editorial, and two things. I mean, number one, making sure that the editorial process at every step was accessible, which meant incorporating audio description early in editorial so that we could share scenes and share pieces of the film with the kids and other blind collaborators to get feedback. So just figuring out that process and making sure that it's a bit of a dance, right? Like sometimes the audio description has to come first and sometimes the film has to come first. So, I think there was definitely a challenge in navigating that and getting a process that felt right for that. And then I think the other thing was just, again, myself and the primary editor are sighted. And for us, realizing very early that, like I mentioned, we weren't editing the footage to the visuals. We were editing the footage to the audio because that's how the kids filmed it, right? And so, film so often, there's a primacy of visual over audio. And so flipping that primacy and really, again, thinking it through, being self-conscious, being aware of what that meant and leaning into it, I think was very challenging, but by the end of it, incredibly rewarding and incredibly creatively fulfilling.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. And once again, just such a fascinating process and journey that you guys were on.
Yeah.
And speaking of audio, one thing that we definitely have to touch on is the fact that this film has open audio description, which is definitely not the norm.
Yep.
Usually, films have that narration track that you can put on a streaming service, or they have headphones that you put in your ear when you're at a movie theater. But this film is unique as well in the fact that any person can go to a theater or they can watch it and it's going to be the same track and everyone gets to experience the same thing. And I think that's really awesome as well.
Beyond that, Lee, I think the audio description is part of the movie. Like, there's no version without the description, right?
Exactly.
100%.
I love that. And
Yeah.
it's funny because when this screamed at Slam Dance, Lee was like, "Oh, this movie has AD," and I was thinking yes, it does, but like I don't know, I hadn't seen it yet. I was like, I don't know if that qualifies because if it's part of the movie, is it AD? And I watched it, I was like, this is totally audio description. Like, this is so cool because it goes a long way to educate sighted audiences too, not only on the competition, but like how AD works and just kind of getting them used to it. I love that so much.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I mean, I think, and again, from the beginning, we were committed to making it open audio description so that it would be, no matter what theater environment it was playing in, that everybody could experience it. And when we first were showing rough cuts to sighted audiences in particular, the audio description was not fully implemented. So it was in parts, but not all. And sighted audiences actually had a really hard time because the camera is pointed forward and you don't see who's holding the camera. They had a hard time. And the footage, because it's all GoPro and it's all the same frame size, the same lensing, all that kind of stuff, the footage, sometimes it's hard to tell, right? Am I with Salome? Am I with Isaiah? Who's holding the camera? I see a cut again from one shot to another. Does that mean I'm with a new person? So we found actually that the audio description helped sighted audiences navigate that cinematographic world, that confusion, just as much as it was helping blind low vision audiences, which is such an interesting kind of discovery, right? And at the end of the day, I think helps to reinforce this notion that the audio description, it's an inherent part of the film. And it's not narration. It's not your traditional audio description, right? It's a little in the middle, a little different, but it's providing exposition for all audiences and helping all audiences kind of navigate and understand and make their way through this film.
Absolutely. And I think that even distinguishes it more from other films that have standard audio description narration.
Right.
That this is very much a fully integrated piece, that the audio description is the story as well as the rest of the audio, that you
Yeah,
can't have one without the other in this case.
exactly.
I'm curious to know, you had mentioned that, some sighted audiences, and their reactions when you were doing rough cuts. How has the film been received overall now that it's, played at some festivals? And I know that it's headed towards a theatrical release, which I'd love for you to touch on as well.
Yeah. So we're yes. So the film is releasing in theaters. I think it's 12 cities that will be showing in all over the country, from New York to LA, Seattle, Minneapolis, Atlanta. And again, the film is open AD, open captions. So we're super excited to bring out to these theaters, audiences from across the site spectrum. And we've actually talked to some of the theaters and some of the local community contacts about trying to get some of the largest blind low vision audiences that these theaters have ever seen, pun intended, which will be exciting. But yeah, and I think the reaction, it's been so interesting. A lot of sighted audiences, they watch the first 5 minutes. They are made very uncomfortable with the film and they respond negatively to it. And I think that is a combination of, number one, what I talked about before, like you watch a film and you expect the visuals to be primary over the audio. And this film very deliberately flips those. And I think sighted audiences, you have to kind of go through a learning process, or you have to kind of submit to the film. And that's challenging. And then also, the video footage, because the kids are, have these cameras on their chest, and some of the kids, they move around a lot. So the footage, and it's, it feels very first person. So for some sighted audiences, it actually can, gives you a little motion sickness. It can impact you that way, especially if you sit right up at the front, next to the screen. So some audiences respond that way. I think where we've had success is audiences that are looking for a more experimental film, quite frankly, who are open-minded that way, who don't go into this expecting that it's going to be Spellbound or the traditional competition documentary that they've seen 10 times, but are really looking for a new kind of sensory cinematic experience. And if they're open to that, I think the film works really well and is incredibly successful. But it's challenging. I mean, I think it really does force sighted audiences to reconsider their bias in terms of what a film is, how it's supposed to work. And it's a whole, we could spend another hour talking about it, but, what does it mean for a blind person to make a film? We've had some sighted people, when they hear that the film is made by these blind kids, they think it's a gimmick or a trick, or, we just glued cameras on their heads and had them run around and that was it. Obviously, I find that kind of perception and that reaction kind of offensive, to say the least. But it does bring up, what does it mean for a blind person to make a film, right? Like fundamentally. And how does that idea, this idea of blind cinema, how does that actually transform or evolve the medium of cinema itself? How can that help us reevaluate and challenge the form and the way that cinema works for audiences? So for me, as offensive as some of those questions and some of those, those categorizations might be, they also show that the film really is, in a very unassuming way, kind of a radical statement about what cinema is and who it can be by and for.
Yeah, it doesn't fit into any one particular box. And I think that's really what makes it stand out, is you can't just categorize it as it's fully documentary, it's fully this, it's fully that. It's a little bit of everything that is just integrated so well together into a very compelling journey with these kids that are at this competition.
Yeah, and I really do think it's breaking, like you said, it's breaking barriers because it's made in such a cool way. No one's ever really done it like this before. The movie itself and the story itself is interesting with, the Braille competition. It's intense and you're cheering for the people who've been shooting the documentary the whole time. Because, you feel like you are them, the way it's shot. But then beyond that, it really portrays how BLV people see the world and experience the world, and experiencing the documentary might be the closest thing we could show someone and be like, this is how it is.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a true compliment to the kids and what they captured, and obviously to the film. But there is something magical about the fact that you can feel the person who's filming, but you don't see them. There's something so kind of emotional and visceral, and and like I said, I mean, because the cameras, they're wearing them on their chest for the most part, you literally sometimes can feel like the rise and fall of their chest, as they breathe. Or Salome in particular, she does a lot of she'll kind of bounce from side to side, and she moves around a lot. She's wiggling, and the camera's moving with her. And there's just something so intimate and physical and personal that it really does connect you to them deeply as they go through the experiences, and they compete and they cheer and cry and, celebrate and whatever, all that stuff. And again, when we came up with this idea, we had no idea it was going to be so successful. We didn't know. We just thought we'd try.
Did you have any experience with anyone blind or in the community before walking into Braille that day, or what intrigued you about the disability community, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, not with the blind community, no, and knew very little. I mean, I was a total newbie as far as what Braille is, all that kind of, I thought it was a language, a lot of the same kind of misconceptions and misunderstandings that the general public has. I had made a couple films that focused on folks in the disability community, developmentally disabled, deaf, non-speaking, all that kind of stuff. So I had some experience that way. And I had definitely, in the last couple films, had spent a lot of time thinking about accessibility and thinking about audience and making sure that the films, not only the relationship with the subject in the film was honorable and ethical and all that kind of stuff, but we were also honoring them in terms of making sure that the film was accessible to their community as an audience. So open captions for the last couple films, and we've definitely thought a lot about that stuff. But no, this was the first one with the blind community itself.
And as we wrap up, one last question to throw at you here is, how has your perspective changed or shifted, or maybe there's something that you've learned from working with the blind and low vision community during the process of this film?
I mean, again, I would go back to that very first day that I walked into the Braille Challenge and seeing the importance of community, that idea of what it means to be part of a community, to be in community with other folks who, again, share your point of view, share some of your experience. There was just something so powerful about that within the blind community. And then the other thing that really struck me, and you guys are going to laugh, but it's just the fluency with technology. Right? Every single one of those teenagers, they've got a smartphone. They've got all the apps. They're using AI to help them navigate, and LiDAR and all this like high-tech stuff. They're listening to, they're having their phone read back text to them at 2 or 3 times normal speed, which gives me a headache. And I don't even understand how you do that, but they do it. Like, their fluency and how adept and advanced they are in utilizing technology to help them navigate and move through the world, that was just mind-blowing.
It is pretty crazy how far technology has come. And now, even for those individuals who are blind that don't read Braille, there's enough technology out there that you could still operate without Braille, even though I think it's a good skill for anyone to have. Yeah. And then going back to the community and joy part of it that you had mentioned at the beginning when you first walked into Braille, I think that the film encapsulates that so well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is. It's such a beautiful thing. And there's a great moment in the film when Isaiah, he's in the hotel and he's taking the elevator up to his floor, and the door opens and another family gets in, and Isaiah says, "Hey, is that another Braille blind person in the elevator?" And the kid says, "Yeah." And Isaiah's just so excited. Like, that to me is such a beautiful thing and such a powerful thing. And from my perspective, and I'm sure, Alex, you can know this, but for me, the Braille Challenge, I mean, it's great in terms of its recognition of these kids' intellectual achievements. It's great in terms of just extolling the invaluable, need for literacy, giving people the ability to read and all that kind of stuff. But just putting a bunch of kids in a room together who are alike, that to me is the real power of the event. And the real beauty of it. And I hope, as you said, Lee, that the film captures that and, is able to communicate that to audiences so that they can feel that and revel in that joy, because it's a beautiful thing.
It is very beautiful. And I think being blind, especially, I mean, all disabilities and sometimes life in general can be isolating. But I think being blind, especially, is very isolating.
Yeah.
And that sense of community is really, really important.
Well, David, thank you so much for being here to talk about Brailled It. And where can people follow the film and see the touring schedule if they want to go check it out in a city near them?
The easiest way is just on the web. It's the website, which is www.brailledit.com. Hashtag Brailled It the movie. We're on Facebook and Instagram and all those places. But the website has all of the theatrical listings, the links to buy tickets at the theaters, and all the information you could want.
Do you have any Q&A sessions with any of those screenings?
We do. We've got in-person Q&A sessions already set up for Los Angeles and New York. And I think also San Francisco and Seattle. There'll be a Q&A panel afterwards with both filmmakers, either myself or one of the kids from the film, along with local community members and folks who are associated with the Braille Challenge. So those Q&As will be, I think, super interesting and definitely dynamic. And then we'll have in the theater lobbies, at least in New York and LA, and we're hoping everywhere, a Brailler, a Perkins Brailler, that for folks who haven't seen one or experienced one, they'll be able to check it out. And there'll be someone there who can show them how it works and maybe even Braille their name or a phrase if they'd like it. And there's something, just to finish, there's something really cool about seeing in an audience that's mixed, that's both blind and sighted, because they're having the same but slightly different experience. And then the conversations afterwards, right, that to me, again, is a really beautiful, powerful thing. So in some ways, our hope is, obviously we want to revolutionize the world and transform all these movie theaters into hubs for the BLV community to come and see movies. But I'm also really thrilled about the opportunity for folks across the sight spectrum to engage with each other and have really meaningful dialogue, about and, after the film about it and about just their experiences.
And we encourage all of our listeners to go out and see the movie if you're interested. We will definitely be putting the link to the website in the description of this episode.
And if you have any questions about anything that we talked about today with David or about Brailled It or anything else, feel free to email us at darkroomfilmcast@gmail.com. Once again, that's darkroomfilmcast@gmail.com. And you can also follow our Instagram at darkroomfilmcast and like and subscribe on our YouTube channel at darkroomfilmcast as well.
Yeah, and we'd like to thank Matt Lauterbach and All Senses Go for helping out with captions and Jamie Guyon for editing.
Yay, Matt. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is awesome. And we'd like to thank you all out there for listening. We'll see you back here next time on another episode of The Dark Room.
Take care, guys.